Thank you so much. No, I'm delighted to have you all here with us today. It's the second day of our conference. We had a very exciting first day already yesterday, but we're even more excited now about the second day. This is the final conference of the EU Academy project. So there's been 3 years. On this occasion, I also want to thank the European Commission and the European Union for co-funding our project. Um, the theme here is the European Union and international security threats, responses, and international cooperation. Yesterday, we had some very exciting discussions ranging from terrorism and counterterrorism to geopolitics, looking at the international partners of the European Union, looking at the various conflicts around the world, basically what used to be called the European neighborhood. Perhaps nowadays it's starting to be an old phrase, but it goes around the eastern side of it. So we looked a little bit at Ukraine. We looked a little bit also at the conflict in Azerbaijan and Armenia. We then also looked into the Middle Eastern conflicts, and we looked into, yeah, a number of the different aspects of the security threats that are relevant for the European Union and for in a sense, the continued security activeness of the European Union. So we had a very good first round yesterday. So we're really excited to have a very excellent second round today. So I'm really looking forward to all the amazing panels that we have. It'll be a long but very, very fruitful day. I'm sure we're going to learn a lot of things. So thank you so much, everyone, for being here. And I'll hand the floor back to Sarah. Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you very much, Christian. And let's get started with our panel 2A on strategic, diplomatic, and intelligence-related challenges facing Europe and the European Union. And we will have 4 or 5 presentations. There's a bit of suspense there. And the first presentation will be given by Michael Jackson, who is a doctoral candidate at Dublin City University. And Michael will be presenting on facilitating international diplomacy through effective diplomatic security. So if any of you would like to share the slides, then you should all have the power to share, as you are all, share your screen, as you are all co-hosts. So without any further ado, I would like to hand over to Michael.
Thanks, Sarah. Good morning, everyone. Just checking that you can hear me.
Absolutely, loud and clear.
Okay, so I'm my study is going to be on diplomatic security, and I suppose the theme of it is the importance of diplomacy in the world today, but how that is facilitated through effective diplomatic security. So really, it's primarily focused on security, but not as an end in itself, but as a facilitator for diplomacy. My research question specifically is how are the risks and threats to diplomatic missions and personnel managed and mitigated, and how an effective model of diplomatic security can be developed. So what I'm looking at is a risk management structure which most governments employ, some very formal, some not so formal, but basically they risk manage the activities of the various diplomats and the diplomatic missions. So for instance, in personal security or physical security, they assess what is the risk in a particular environment, especially high risk environments. What are the mitigating factors that they need to take to allow diplomacy to be continued? And, that's obviously an important aspect of it if there's a change in the threat level or risk level. So very much looking at that part of it. And is there an effective model? So are there, commonalities to the various approaches to security that can be developed and a model implemented, a standard model. So one of the ways I'm going to approach it is to have a comparative analysis between a number of countries. So Ireland, Austria, and France are 3 countries, 2 very similar, which say in international political posture, Ireland and Austria. We're both neutral countries, relatively small. So we have a particular threat level, while it may not be, as high as the US or France. We're going to look at that in terms of a smaller neutral country and maybe compare the two. The other country I'm going to look at is France, obviously a former colonial power, a member of NATO, and obviously not recognized as neutral on the international front. So again, what I would be hoping from those three would be to look at the most similar cases and then most different cases as well. So obviously the French security posture around the world would be quite different to Ireland and Austria. So I hope to achieve some learning there. The aim of the research, as I mentioned, is, look at the areas within diplomatic security within the states. So I will also be looking at the EEAS, the diplomatic service of the EU as an entity. So I think there can be very rich and good learnings from those, because we obviously have well over 130 missions and positions around the world. So I would hope to garner some information from that as well. And what I would hope to do is look how they manage the risk. And, when we think of diplomatic security, we might just be thinking of, reinforced embassies, armored vehicles or security guards. But a lot of the risk factors, generally speaking, are managed through good intelligence, good liaison, sharing of information. So it's in these areas also that I will be looking to have some synergies. Is there a sharing platform, we say, in relation to information and threat levels that can be established. I will take a qualitative approach. So I've identified a number of, I suppose, key stakeholders, which would be law enforcement personnel, diplomats, diplomatic security personnel, military personnel. So a lot of the countries during my research I've discovered will use a mix of local law enforcement, we'd say, if they're operating in a high risk environment. They may also use private security contractors as well, and they often augment it with their own personnel as well. So for instance, a police officer from the UK may be stationed to an embassy abroad, and similarly with the US Marine program, they have them stationed around the embassy. And I know through my own experience working with the Irish Department of Foreign Affairs, we often deploy police and military intermittently for specific issues in embassies and abroad. So look, the importance of the research, I suppose, is, I would argue it's crucially important, because, not only practically, but symbolically, the presence of a mission in a country is hugely important. And I would just pick Ukraine as an example. The diplomatic facilities were moved out after the initial phases of the conflict, and we were very anxious, and all of the EU were very anxious to get the diplomacy established again within Kiev. So I think, as I've said, it's symbolic in terms of support for the country, but also practical elements as well. So I think that's a huge issue. Also, yeah, the Middle East conflict, there's lots of issues there in relation to diplomacy and a lot of behind the scenes diplomacy as well. And I'll mention slightly later on is, a lot of the citizen evacuation issues are dealt with by diplomats by their nature. So, there may be traveling involved to various unstable areas. So again, that's how crucially important it is. I think it's also important, the research is because there's not a huge amount in this area covered. So there's a dearth of research and disinformation in relation to any other studies. So I would hope to build on. There's a number of key studies that I've found, but not a huge number. And hopefully then it will be a platform for other studies to take place. So just the broad framework, and I don't want to complicate it too much, but what I'm looking at is diplomatic activity as we say, the risk activity. So, the daily missions to and from the embassies, dealing in the embassy, maybe travel within country. Obviously, the private, in terms of private security for ambassadors and their families when they're at home, etc. That's an issue in high risk environments. So I'm looking at all the activities of diplomats and basically going to, embrace them in a risk management framework. So look at what they do, look at the risks that are involved in specific areas. And this might be something very basic, like crime, natural disasters. So it mightn't necessarily be a major terrorist incident. The bulk of the risks involve regular risk, road traffic accidents. So for instance, does the ambassador drive? Is it safe to drive in the roads that he's on? So a lot of basic issues will be dealt with also. So within that framework, to develop an effective diplomatic security posture. So that really would be, what are the measures we need to take? And some countries, it may not be, hugely restrictive. It may be a benign security environment where diplomats can move relatively freely and engage with the population, and then there's no issue. But in the more high-risk environments, you might be looking at restricting a diplomat's movements, which obviously doesn't, encourage diplomacy, but it might be the difference between maintaining a mission or not. So I think that's really the two ends of the spectrum that I would be looking at. And ultimately, it's to facilitate EU diplomacy, which is the ultimate goal in relation to international cooperation. So just lastly, I'll just give you a brief outline. Again, risk management is at the center of it. And look, I think as we all know, probably two elements to risk is, the likelihood of a risk happening and then the impact. So we look at the various risks and what do you need to mitigate it. So for instance, under the personal safety and security elements, a risk mitigation might be training and awareness for diplomats, etc., engagement with law enforcement and develop intelligence, etc. So they're mitigating factors that we'd be looking at under the personal safety and security element. Under physical security, it might be reinforced buildings, alarms, TV monitors, etc., physical security, and maybe a guard force outside the embassy. So again, what are the physical security aspects to it? And then probably one of the, I suppose, more difficult or trickier parts of a diplomat's response is, I mentioned the evacuation, but in the case of maybe a citizen kidnapping or some issue arises, it will be on the responsibility of, the home nation, we'd say, where the citizen is from, to travel, possibly to conflict zones, maybe for long periods to deal with an evacuation or to deal with an incident such as a kidnap or other serious crime. So there will be a lot of planning around that. I think if you look at the two others, they're very static. They're probably in the country, the host country that the diplomat will be staying in. But the emergency planning and crisis response tends to be, could be anywhere. So there's obviously new risks that will develop in relation to it. So look, that's my overall framework. And again, just I'll finish up now shortly. I suppose what I'm hoping to do is, having gathered the data, look at the various stats, maybe there's an information sharing network in Europol or in the
Unfortunately, it seems we have lost Michael here. So I think he was coming to the end of his presentation. So I imagine that it's probably going to...
straightforwardly.
Sorry. So Michael, you were frozen for a little bit. So if you could perhaps rewind a little bit. Tell us what you said in the last couple of minutes. No, unfortunately, you are frozen again.
Can you hear me now?
Yes. Perhaps if you could...
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Yeah, sorry. So I was finished there anyway. Yeah, so I was just wrapping up to say, ultimately out of this would be a practical, workable model of security where you can take the best from the various countries and, develop a model, maybe areas of cooperation in the EEAS or through Europol or, other agencies that exist like that. That's the ultimate goal. So look, that's 11 minutes 30. I think I'm under anyway, but that's really it in a nutshell, Sarah and colleagues. So I can finish over there. Thanks for listening, and thanks for the opportunity to speak to you this morning.
Thank you very much, Michael. Very interesting, and I'm sure there'll be questions and comments, but we will take those after all the presentations. And now I would like to give the floor to Dr. Emmett Foley, who's also a colleague of ours at Dublin City University. And Emmett will be talking about Ireland and European intelligence, trust and mistrust in Europe's weak link. So Emmett, you have the floor.
There we go. Excellent. Can everyone hear me okay?
Absolutely.
I won't be sharing a presentation, but I will give an overview of the current paper. And this is something that myself and Christian are working on currently. Well, we're actually on a deadline for sometime next week for the European Journal of Intelligence Studies. It's a special issue in relation to trust and the development of trust within countries with other countries in relation to how they share intelligence, how they build and gain trust with each other, how it might be lost. And we chose Ireland for convenience, I suppose, in some ways, but also because it's a very, very interesting case within Europe and the world in some respects. Because unlike most other countries, we don't have a dedicated foreign intelligence service as such. So as most of you may know, and I'm sure Michael certainly knows, it's Crime and Security Branch of the Guards, and it is Army G2, and internal and external surveillance is undertaken by both of them in different capacities. And a number of areas, so that the general topic is trust and how it's built and how it's gained and how countries interact with each other. But as an area of literature and an area of study, it is underdeveloped. Informal networks appear to be the way that a lot of information sharing is done, and people that I've spoken to in relation to that, just to get a steer, have suggested that is very much the case. And I've mentioned it before, when my father was a member of Special Branch in the 1980s, some of the best information he was able to gain was through informal networks with colleagues in the United Kingdom when they were chasing the INLA and the provos around the country. So there is this informal aspect to this, but if we were to break it down into 5 categories or 5 topic areas, obviously our history has a massive long shadow on this topic. Our neutrality, the trust element, or buying into the European Union program and neo-functionalism, and how we've gotten involved in supranational affairs since we joined in the early 1970s, how we've bought into things like economic cooperation on such a massive level, but then in certain areas we stay out of it, and the main one being defense and anything to do with defense. So the 2 threats that the state always, or the state security apparatus was developed around, was England and internal subversion. And most of the money and effort and energy from the foundation of the state up until arguably the Good Friday Agreement, and maybe a little bit after it, has been focused on less so on Britain as a threat, but more so on internal subversion. But since the Good Friday Agreement, we've seen the services degraded on a massive level. The capability has dropped to a certain extent, and the budgets. So trying to gauge any of this was kind of tricky. So what we did was we went back to the concept of neutrality. And on the last open forum on neutrality, when we were having the various debates in the NUIs about should Ireland stay neutral, should it join NATO, should it get involved more or become more involved in military activity throughout Europe, there was a poll taken, and 61% of the population are stated, or that were sampled, said that we're in favor of maintaining neutrality. But what does neutrality mean in this context? The Irish public generally looks at anything to do with defence or security through the lens of neutrality. So as a gauge, it's quite useful. So if 61% of the population is for staying out of NATO and staying out of any kind of military alliances, fair enough. So that we can then use that to extrapolate it down and say, well, if 61% of the population are in favour of maintaining neutrality, what is the impact on our security? Well, it would mean that given the current climate in Europe, there is a certain, I suppose, a lack of defence literacy and what that entails across the population. This idea that neutrality as a concept is some kind of invisibility cloak, that, well, why would we need to get involved? And this is part of the intelligence aspect of it. And our closest neighbour is now looking at, in recent papers that have been published in the UK, and particularly from defence think tanks, are looking at Ireland in a very, very negative light in relation to its, the security not only of Europe but of the United Kingdom as well. And that's not to say we should get overly involved with the United Kingdom or sign up to a military alliance to suit their needs, but they are certainly looking at us. And it's interesting, you talk of the eastern flank of Europe and everyone's looking towards Ukraine and Russia. As the westernmost country on the western flank of Europe, we've got the transatlantic pipeline, the cable system there, and we saw recently, as an example, that the cable between Germany and I believe Finland was targeted by the Russians, showing a vulnerability there. $10 trillion of transactions are run through that pipeline every day. It's a major European, US and Irish interconnect. But we don't have an anti-submarine capability, so we can't monitor Russian submarines. We have to rely on the Royal Navy. The same with our airspace, and that's something we touch on in terms of the latter part of this paper is on current threats and what will threaten the state or potentially threaten the state, and this is one of them. So we don't have our own primary radar system, so we can't track Russian bombers flying over Irish airspace. We can't intercept them. We have to rely on someone else. So Britain is looking at us in terms of, well, it's a weak link. And we only have to look at the example of the two world wars in terms of how important the Atlantic was with the Western approaches and getting supplies from the US and where shipping would come in. And at a recent NATO conference that I was at as well, this was a major topic in relation to the reactivation of the Reforger program and Reforger exercises and the reinforcement and resupply of Europe from across the Atlantic. So we're in this kind of unusual position where we have this antagonistic, to a certain extent, relationship with our nearest neighbour, although it is much better than it was. We're a key state in Europe in terms of pharmaceuticals, high-tech industry, finance, and just being involved in the European programme itself, yet we struggle internally to monitor, and we're aware of Russian involvement in the state, the GRU's presence in the state, China, Iran, particularly in various educational institutions as well, because they're always looking for intellectual property to get their hands on, and because of the industries we have. So am I running out of time? Nearly there. So the paper is about how we perceive ourselves, how we're going to integrate further into Europe, how we're going to build trust with our nearest neighbours and also in Europe, and what does that entail for Ireland in terms of security. I suppose we haven't finished the conclusion at this point, but one of the conclusion points might be that we not necessarily need to wake up, but we need to be more aware that we are not an isolated, backward country anymore, that we are very, very much a part of this. We bought into neo-functionalism, we bought into the European Union, and the world has changed. And it's, I mean, even in the last 10 days, look at Syria, how things have changed rapidly. Where do we see ourselves? Because, speaking to a colonel in the Defence Forces recently said, neutrality doesn't mean we need to be defenceless. And we very much need to get with the programme that we might not need to be joining military alliances, but we certainly need to be very, very aware of our own internal security and what's going on. And it might just mean that we're going to have to pay for it, which is something that we don't want to do, because defence in this country is seen as a sufferance across the board. I mean, just as a very basic example to finish on, a lot of the specialist policing only gets 10% of the Garda budget, looking at their own figures that they've released. And of that 10%, security and crime and security is lumped in with roads policing. Like that's not a very, very advantageous outcome for the state. So that's what the paper is about. I hope there's questions, and I'll hand back over. I think I'm under time for a change. I hope. So that's where we are with that paper. So hopefully it'll be finished this week. Fingers crossed.
That's perfect. Emmett, thank you so much. That was extremely interesting, and I'm sure there'll be lots of questions and comments as well. But let's now move on to the next presentation, which will be given by Dr. Ikram Yakubov from the University of Edinburgh. And he will be talking about information psychological war at subliminal level, the case of the GRU and the KGB SVR. So Ikram, you have the floor.
Okay, good morning, everyone. Can you hear me?
We hear you absolutely fine.
Okay, yeah. First of all, I would like to thank Professor Sarah Leonard and Christian Conrad for organizing this event. And secondly, again, I'm Ikram from Scotland, and today I'm going to talk about information psychological war. To be precise, my presentation will address one of the understudied aspects of this warfare, and I named it Information Psychological War at Subliminal Level. Prior to sharing with you, my dear friends, my research findings, let's quickly have a look at what traditional information psychological war is and how it is treated in the mainstream literature. So, traditional information psychological war as a concept is defined as an umbrella term. Unlike traditional war, the physical war, information psychological war is barely noticeable, involves complex and subtle cognitive activities. Information psychological war aims to conquer targets' hearts and minds and manipulate them. And information psychological war has constituents called warfare. And according to the mainstream literature of war studies, intelligence studies, security studies, strategy, and etc., and other adjacent disciplines, these constituents are electronic warfare, involves the use of sophisticated technology and electromagnetic spectrum to incapacitate or disrupt various communication systems, vehicles, aircraft, and drones. And then cyber warfare involves the use of sophisticated programs to damage targets' various information systems and infrastructure. And then physical subversion involves the use of the whole gamut of means, such as bombing, cutting the cables via military vehicles, etc., to inflict a physical damage to targets' information systems and infrastructure. And then non-physical subversion involves the use of infiltrated agents to undermine or disrupt target sensitive activities that are directly linked to information security. For instance, Snowden revelations and PRISM. And then counter-information warfare includes defending one's critical information systems and infrastructure, sophisticated technologies and intellectual property, engineering countermeasures to cope with all forms of offensive information warfare. And the last one is psychological warfare. Involves the use of complex, covert and overt mind, emotion and psyche manipulation techniques. Exempli gratia pictures, language and speech acts, social networks and media, religion and belief, culture and social facts, face-to-face interactions, songs and music, narratives and paintings, honey traps or ideology, etc., at consciousness level. And as we can see, these findings on traditional information psychological war that the mainstream literature doesn't address one of the subtle aspects of this warfare, that is information psychological war at subliminal level. So, what is information psychological war at subliminal level, and how I managed to determine this particular type or form of information psychological war? While researching how the GRU, it's Russia's military intelligence service, the KGB, UK's MI6, otherwise known as Secret Intelligence Service, and US CIA, how they organize their agent recruitment activities, I came across the following finding. The KGB's domestic obsession with the detection and suppression of ideological subversion spilled over into its foreign operations. The reason for this obsession, according to the predominant view in the West, was and still is A, Stalinist paranoia, and B, a strong inclination to impress the party leadership during the Soviet time and now semi-autocratic president by its zeal and discrediting dissidents and hostile elements abroad and at home. However, further research that was conducted through semi-structured interviews, archival analysis, surveying peer-reviewed articles on secondary sources, governmental reports from Britain, US, and Russia indicated that this obsession I'm talking about now, obsessing with the detection and suppression of ideological subversion, both at home and abroad, was prevalent during the presidency of not only Putin and Medvedev, but also Yeltsin, who was largely considered to be a politician with respect towards democracy and democratic values. In other words, although the KGB doesn't exist anymore and the Russian intelligence and security services are independent entities, only the GRU is departmental. Every single entity of the mighty Russian intelligence security community is still obsessed with the detection of suppression, of ideological subversion, both at home and abroad, despite the fact that the USSR doesn't exist anymore. To get to the bottom of this regularity, I adopted and applied a structured approach to the research process that included identifying the agent recruitment cases of 79 individual or related cases that were representative of the following countries and their intelligence and security services: USSR, Russia, Britain, and USA. So, case 1, Britain, Melita Norwood, otherwise known as Hola. Melita Norwood was recruited by the NKVD in early 1930s and later handled by the GRU. She was a secretary of Bailey at the British Non-Ferrous Metals Research Association and passed sensitive material about the British atomic weapons project to the USSR. To recruit her, the NKVD utilized a highly original and effective technique, deceiving by telling the truth or a half-truth technique. Due to these techniques' effective use, Melita Norwood overlooked the brutal reality of Stalin's Russia and only saw the idealistic misimage of the world's first worker peasant state, which had abolished unemployment and for the first time enabled working people to realize their full potential. She didn't seem to grasp the depravity of the Stalinist regime into whose service she entered. Please pay attention to the following extracts that were taken from her interview. I did what I did not to make money, but to help prevent the defeat of a new system, which had, at great cost, given ordinary people food and fares which they could afford, given them education and a health service. And second extract that was taken from her interview is, I never regret that I worked for the USSR. I would do everything again. What I did, in fact, helped humanity to avoid the possibility of a third world war involving the USA, Britain, and the USSR. What is interesting in her case is A, the use of the deceiving by telling the truth or a half-truth technique. And B, reluctance of the security service, MI5, to question her, despite the fact that she was identified as a mole in 1965. And C, intentionally hiding Hola's connections with the Soviet intelligence security services from not only decision policymakers, such as Prime Minister, Home Secretary, etc., but also from the directors of security service, MI5. Security Service MI5 refused to question Hola even after she publicly admitted her work for the Soviet intelligence and security services in 1999. What if the reason for Security Service, otherwise known as MI5's reluctance to question Hola or Melita Norwood, was not avoiding unveiling their mole identifying methods, or the belief that she didn't pose any conceivable threat to national security, but rather was an outcome of certain MI5 agents' sympathy and empathy towards a like-minded person? In other words, those agents might also be victims of the KGB organized and used information psychological war at subliminal level. Now, case 2, USSR Russia, Mitrokhin and Gordievsky. Vasily Mitrokhin was a former senior KGB officer. He joined the MGB the predecessor of KGB Foreign Intelligence Unit in 1948. In 1957, he was transferred from an operative job to the archive of the first chief directorate of the KGB and was responsible for foreign intelligence activities. Mitrokhin was never recruited by any foreign intelligence agency, and until his defection to the UK, he never collaborated with any foreign intelligence agency. As a chief archivist of the first chief directorate, he was responsible for moving the highly sensitive archive from Lubyanka, old building, to Yasenova, new building. During this time, he hand-copied hundreds of thousands of pages that contained detailed information about the first chief directorate's operations overseas, its agents' names and aliases, methods of recruitment and means of communication. He quit his job at the KGB in 1985. After the collapse of the USSR in 1991, he first came to the US Embassy in Latvia with a copy of the KGB archive in 1992. However, the CIA agents didn't treat his papers seriously, and he was turned away. He then walked into the British Embassy. Mitrokhin and his family was exfiltrated to the UK. The MI6 officers also retrieved his 25,000-page archive and brought it to the UK. Please pay great attention to the following finding: disillusionment and alienation. According to Mitrokhin, probably my delusionment started after Khrushchev's speech in which he denounced Stalin's cult of personality. I regularly listened to broadcasts on the BBC and Voice of America. However, my disillusionment with the Soviet system became very firm, and it turned into a mere alienation after I started working as an archivist of the first chief directorate. I was shocked seeing how the KGB and its predecessors routinely repressed millions of innocent Soviet people. And the second case is Oleg Gordievsky. He was a high-ranked KGB officer colonel who was a chief of London station of the KGB. While he was in Copenhagen in 1966, he started contacting the Danish and British intelligence services via encrypted coded communication means about his willingness to collaborate with them. He was exfiltrated to the UK as well. Disillusionment and alienation. Gordievsky became disillusioned with the KGB and the USSR after the KGB-led Warsaw Pact countries invaded Czechoslovakia in 1968. And the case 3 is representative of USA, and our object here is Robert Hansen. Robert Hansen was a former senior FBI agent who oversaw FBI's counterintelligence activities against USSR and Russia. He joined the FBI in 1976 and contacted the GRU, military intelligence of USSR, in 1979. Although he was one of the most valuable moles of the Soviet and later Russian intelligence security services, neither the KGB nor the GRU managed to establish his true identity until his arrest. Disillusionment and alienation. According to the official documents and narratives, Hansen grew up in a bad family, was psychologically traumatized during his childhood, and was always prone to extramarital affairs, and suffered from certain psychological and mental issues. However, according to the GRU and KGB handlers, archival findings and interviews, he was a cold-blooded man who calculated everything. If that CIA mole in the KGB didn't sell the evidence against Hansen to the CIA for $7 million, neither the CIA nor FBI would be able to uncover him. Now, these are empirical findings through which I'm going to present you my analytical framework in order to explain how information psychological war at subliminal level works and how it is engineered and implemented by certain intelligence and security services. Analyzing those 79 individual and related cases indicated that 70 of these agents themselves were initiators of their collaborations with the intelligence security services of a rival country. They were disillusioned and alienated due to mainly disappointment resulting from the discovery that something, for instance, state government policies, intelligence activities, was not as good as they believed it to be. My research findings enabled me to come up with the following ontology-centric analytical framework for information psychological war at subliminal level. Firstly, information psychological war should not be treated as only an epistemological occurrence that targets one only at cognitive mental level. Secondly, humans are constituted by organic, inorganic, psychological, and spiritual strata. Thus, information psychological war can also be organized at being level, targeting humans' ontic traits that are neither acquired nor constructed, but rather innate and intrinsic to their human self and nature. For instance, intolerance towards injustice and double standards, ability and willingness to be altruist, empathy, lust for something, propensity to cruelty or violence, love, hate, etc. All these being intrinsic traits play an important role in humans' interactions with their environments and making humans a productive processor of reality. These ontic traits, in fact, are responsible for subliminal activities or occurrences in humans. No effective preventive or countering measures are available to cope with information psychological war at subliminal level. Therefore, the Russians, regardless of being under any political regime, Russians always employed mass surveillance and were obsessed with the detection and suppression of ideological subversion. In the West, information psychological war at subliminal level is either skirted as an inconvenient topic or completely rejected. The governments with claims about, just imagine, the governments with claims about democratic values are not receptive to the idea that their undemocratic policies disillusioned and alienated their, for instance, spies or civil servants and compelled them to collaborate with, let's say, the Russian or Chinese intelligence security services. Russia's GRU and SVR in Europe. Bearing in mind the factual research findings as well as the analytical framework suggested for information psychological war at subliminal level, I am deducing that Russia is actively using hybrid war against Europe. Information psychological war lies at the heart of this heterogeneous war. In light of Europe's awareness of Russia's hybrid war and active measures, Russia is becoming more reliant upon information psychological war at subliminal level. Moreover, Russia is helping her allies to learn about this particular type of warfare. For instance, the representatives of the Iranian Ministry of Intelligence and Islamic Revolutionary Guards Corps have been taught and trained by the Russian specialists how to organize and implement information psychological war at subliminal level since 2014. And the hard evidence, according to the Reuters, Israel's arrest of almost 30 mostly Jewish citizens who allegedly spied for Iran in 9 covert cells has caused alarm in the country and points to Tehran's biggest effort in decades to infiltrate its archfoe. 4 Israeli security sources said, among the unfulfilled goals of the alleged cells was the assassination of an Israeli nuclear scientist and former military officials. While one group gathered information on military bases and air defenses, Security Service Shin Bet has said, last week the agency and Israel's police said a father and son team had passed on details of Israeli force movements, including in the Golan Heights where they lived. What is interesting in this particular case is ethnicity of these people. Almost all of them are ethnic Jews, not Arab citizens of Israel. The presence of a disillusionment with the state of Israel due to its war in Gaza and mass killings of Palestinians by the IDF, disagreement with Netanyahu's right-wing government, and Zionism, that is ethno-supremacist ideology. That's how targets will be fed. That's how, let's say, that individuals will be recruited. And one of the very important techniques of information psychological war at subliminal level is using the so-called deceiving by telling the truth or a half-truth technique. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ikram. Very detailed and very insightful. Let's now move on to our next presentation, and give me a second as I need to bring back my program. Michael, yeah, please go ahead.
Thanks, Sarah. Emmett, good to talk to you. Just one for you, if you don't mind. I may have worked with your dad, actually. That's how you're
Oh.
making me feel. What was his first name? Do you mind me asking?
David Foley. But
I know.
he spent all his time in Cork, so.
Yeah, no, I know. I know him.
That's Ireland for you.
Yeah, listen, what were we saying? Trust and friendship, you know.
Yeah.
Come here. It was only one, and look, I absolutely, I get what you're in relation to the, I suppose, the neutrality aspect. I did see, and you may have seen it, Fianna Fáil's commitment there to a homeland security type approach. Like, I know it's focused on asylum seekers, but I think they did mention national security in it. I don't know whether you saw that or got a chance to have a look at it.
I'll make a note of it now.
Yeah, it was more, look, I think it was a commitment, commitment to a few things. One was obviously on asylum seekers, but it gave a broader picture. It just said to establish a homeland type security service, like in relation to it. So, look, that's probably a point to make. The other thing you mentioned, informal relationships and networks. So, and look, I suppose I've experience of that myself, where people might want to tell you things, you know, on a one-to-one basis. Do you see that like superseding, we say, the formal structures, or how do they work? I mean, I suppose you want something that will survive maybe two personalities in different organizations that get on. I wonder, how do you even approach that subject?
It's not something we're working into this paper, but it's something that myself and Christian have discussed over the last number of years. And I spoke to John O'Brien very recently about it as well, especially on the back of his last couple of books. And he puts a lot of emphasis on the informal aspect of it. But I suppose it's tricky. There's the personality aspect of it, and then there's the personnel change aspect of it as well. But I think because and correct me if I'm wrong, but I think we are boxed into a certain extent because of the neutrality and what we can share. And I think if there's one thing about this country, it's the informality aspect of it and the kind of the double dealing. We're kind of good at it. I think it's possibly not the only way, but one of the better ways that we can gain information and exchange with partners, because we're kind of hamstrung. John made the point, it's the few beers after the conference where you're sitting down and the network builds from there. But again, it's all dependent on how long that person stays in that position and whether or not they can hand over to the person coming behind them. I don't know. I think it's Dad always said in the 80s we had to make bad law work, and that has a lot of connotations depending on who you talk to. And I think it's similar here. We don't have that formalized system, and we're relying on hand-me-downs and crumbs, and whether or not I suppose the first question that comes to mind is, are you being manipulated by another nation? Like, are we being told, like, for instance, Britain, I suppose, is the low-hanging fruit. Are we being told what they want us to know for a particular reason and not necessarily for our own good? So I don't know. The informal aspect, I'm quite interested in it. It'd be interesting to get into it in more detail in terms of trust and how it's built, because you could quite easily lose trust with it as well, I suppose, if we were being manipulated in that regard. I don't know. I think we need to start being more realistic about all of this. And I think that it starts with the money, and it also starts with behind the scenes figuring out that we're not immune to anything. In fact, now we're more open than we ever were. Fianna Fáil making promises, we'll see. Any of them making promises.
Thanks, Emmett.
Michael, thank you for the question. You might pick it up at a later stage. I'll send you an email.
Yeah, do please. Thank you.
Thanks very much. John has a question as well.
Yeah.
Or perhaps two, I don't know.
Yeah. James, I was very happy to listen to your presentation about the Irish intelligence service. I just want to ask you that, in 2025, I suppose there will be a lot of security and intelligence restructuring in the European Union and related, to the forthcoming EU intelligence service. So is that a motivation for the Irish Republic to have its own intelligence service in the EU? Because as you are aware better than me, the Irish and the British intelligence sharing collaboration is quite well, even though UK is outside the EU, but doesn't mean anything because an intelligence sharing information is more critical. So what was really the motivation for Ireland to have an intelligence service in 2025?
Emmett?
Yeah, I suppose our cooperation with Britain has always been historical, and because we had a shared threat, and when we delved into the limited literature on trust and trust building, and also just looking at the historical aspects of Ireland's involvement or lack of involvement in some cases, we're very opportunistic. It suited us to talk to Britain during the Troubles, for instance, because we had a shared threat. Because of Ulster, but also and as time went on, because of the IRA bombing campaign in Britain in the 1980s, it suited us to share. And in 2025, we fast forward, we bought into a certain element of the Cold War is over, it's all wrapped up, we're all friends now. I used the sonar example. We got the Irish Navy got rid of its sonar capability at the end of the 1990s because it was too expensive, but also because there wasn't the will to keep it on because, well, the Soviet Union doesn't exist anymore. It's not a problem. It's not something we need to worry about. So we bought into the peace and love aspect of it, which is fine. But because of the neutrality question, we do, and I think as a nation, do think that it protects us, that there's a certain element of immunity. I've heard it described as an invisibility cloak, but the last number of years have shown that this is not the case, that we are susceptible to nefarious actors. Britain not being one of them anymore, I don't think. I think we could say that at this point, it's in their best interest that we don't become a backdoor, but we have become a certain element of a backdoor, and that's what they call us. So to bring it to 2025, I think it's just because the world has changed and not for the better in the last number of years that we really, really need to get with the program. We really need to embrace the fact that we're not isolated and on our own anymore, and we do need to start becoming very, very serious about our own security. And I suppose the neutrality thing, people get upset about that because they associate it with military defense pacts and being offensive. I'm not talking about offensive, like building an offensive capability within the state to project power. That's not our thing. We're too small a country, and we have a very small army, and we don't want to be doing that anyway. But what we need to do is preserve the state that we've created. And if we can't monitor internally foreign actors, how are we going to contribute effectively to the European Union in that regard? Because we're open, too open. And it's the bigger picture thing for me. It's like, well, if you want to contribute to Europe, that's fine, but you have to be able to do the small stuff well first, i.e. monitor your own internal security effectively. And I think we've dropped the ball on a number of things. The Russian presence to a certain extent. I mean, we have a rise in the far right in this country for the first time since Owen O'Duffy and the Blue Shirts in the 1920s and the 1930s. And they weren't particularly good fascists. They got sent home by Franco because they were no good during the Civil War. But we have this now. Where did that come from? And we can surmise that it's probably coming from the GRU, perhaps, in terms of funding and as a way of kind of creating a problem that we have to divide our focus and focus on, because the Russians are more than aware that if they leave the embassy in Dublin and they pick up a tail, they'll lose the tail in a few minutes. Why? Because it's a guy that's been seconded to a specialist unit who's not an intelligence officer by training. He's a policeman. Whereas you're dealing with seasoned operatives who are trained in counter-surveillance techniques to a very, very high standard. So, like, it's an internal capability problem. It's a political problem. It's a whole myriad of things. I hope that kind of answers. I know I went around the houses a little bit, but there's so much in it that we're trying to unpick at the minute.
Thank you, Jay. Thank you.
Cheers.
Thanks, Emmett. I mean, I guess that probably can be said of other countries. You probably have a lot of, I think that was shown in Belgium as well. Once they started having quite a lot of terrorist activity on the territory, they were really lacking some capability in terms of, counterterrorism and intelligence. So I guess that's a challenge for a lot of small countries, isn't it? So I don't know if you think there are perhaps lessons to be learned from other small countries also facing challenges.
Absolutely, but I mean, the Belgium got to grips with it. As far as I'm aware, correct me if I'm wrong, but they put money into resourcing the police and counterterrorism police and also the military as well, and bringing them into certain aspects of it. Whereas we still have this reticence, this, oh, well, it'll be okay. It'll be fine. We'll have a few beers and we'll complain about it, but it'll be okay. Will it?
Yeah, I mean, that's, like you said, that's neutrality. That's kind of constrains the realm of possibilities, I guess.
Yeah, it keeps coming back to me what that Defence Forces colonel said to me back in October. He said, being neutral doesn't mean being defenseless. We need to get out of that mindset.
I think the other thing as well, Sarah and Hannah and Emmett, is the sense of urgency. You mentioned the budget, we'd say, on security in the 70s and 80s when, we hear about the state being under threat and, the existence of the state was at risk, and the urgency was there, resources were put in, I suppose. And when you read those organizational change books, they say you must create a sense of urgency before you get, maybe a champion for something like this. And I don't think that's there, Emmett, either. We don't feel it's top of the agenda above so many other things. And, it should be, but it's how to get it there,
Absolutely. Myself and Christian have been talking about this for a couple of years. I mean, it's one of those things, like, we can't be the only people talking about this topic. I'm sure there's clusters of other people maybe talking about this within organizations. And I know I've discussed it at home, and Dad's retired 9 years, but he still feels, and he always mentions the 70s and 80s. He obviously joined in 79, but he was just, they were thrust into doing what he was doing very, very quickly because they needed as well, needed the bodies to be doing the job as quickly as possible. But we're not moving with the threat at all here on any level, I don't think. I mean, even Harris saying at a PAC committee meeting a couple of months ago that he was aware of a right-wing threat in 2019 before the riots in Dublin. But that's fine. That's fine. But what were you doing since 2019? It only becomes urgent when something happens and then it drops off. So how do we bring it to a point where people actually start talking about it properly? I mean, how do we get to the halls of, it's the civil service you need to get to, via politicians maybe, but then even trying to explain this in a way that they might actually go, oh, actually, I see your point. We're constantly getting examples. That pipeline being targeted by Russian submarines between Finland and Germany. The minute I saw it, I was like, we've been talking about this for a number of years. We have a problem, but now they've actually shown that they can do it and they're willing to do it. What does that mean for us? That's a Navy problem to a certain extent. I mean, we bemoan our nearest neighbour, but we're quite happy to let the Royal Navy police our waters in certain capacities and the RAF to do it. Now, I'm happy enough that the RAF do it because at least they can fly high enough.
Thank you, Emmett. So let's, Veli, we'll come to your question afterwards, if you don't mind, because we still need to hear GP's presentation. And I see that Achim is trying to join as well. So GP, please go ahead.
Can you hear me now?
We can hear you. Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, fine. That's fine. Please allow me to share my slides. Okay, fine. So it's my apology for the technical error. Anyway, many thanks for.
GP, unfortunately, we can't hear you anymore. Perhaps I would suggest you switch off your camera because I think it's taking a lot of your bandwidth, and just speak and we will listen to your presentation. And we should be able to hear you better. Yeah, GP, we can't hear you anymore. All right, so I see that Achim has joined us. Achim, would you like to give your presentation then? And perhaps we'll try to go back to GP afterwards. Achim, we can't hear you either.
Hello,
Hello,
do you hear me?
we can hear you, yeah.
Oh, thank you. I think as well I have a problem with the, well, I told you already about this connection is always a bit up and down. Thank you very much. So shall I proceed, Sarah, what you suggest me to do? To
Yeah,
present
you can give your presentation now. I mean, perhaps, yeah, do not share slides or switch on your camera so we can hear you best.
Right. So thank you very much for accepting me at this conference. As written last time, the paper is actually under construction. I have a few slides just to show you because most of these slides are about more than answer. These are questions because the paper is not finished yet. So I will just talk a bit about what is the main corpus of this paper, but then I will switch on the question, which I would like maybe to share with you. I try to upload, if it works, this PowerPoint. I'm not sure about. Let's try. So
Perhaps you can just speak without...
yes, so I mean, I will open the PowerPoint from my screen here.
Exactly.
And I will read you the presentation that is there. It's a pity about this, but I'm very sorry. So basically, my paper is, first part of it is historical narrative. Is a bit weak in that sense because I don't have access to archives in Japan. So it's a narrative that anyway is very much distributed, so to say, in the literature. There is plenty of literature about this case of Finland. And so until 2014, this is basically the history of Finland neutrality and the relationship with the Soviet Union before 1991. And I'm trying to make a link with the Treaty of Tilsit, which goes back to 1807. So my approach is very much historical, because as a historian myself, my PhD, I mean, the one I did is a interdisciplinary PhD, which include international relation and politics on the base of history. So I would like to see the trajectory of the status of the Finnish situation from, let's say, 1807 until the recent development in the Sanna Marin government. I think you can see now my PowerPoint, right? No?
No, we can't, but don't worry,
No?
because your connection
Anyway,
is not very good.
right. So in any case, what are the points now for reflection that I've been including in this paper? And as I mentioned in the abstract, is to develop an understanding of securitization theory in the last, let's say, 10 years, so from 2014 till today. And I think there is enough food for thought about this. There are already some scholars which have been working on this issue of Finnish accession to NATO, analyzing media and the referendum. So I will try also to use that data for the last part of the paper, which is, as said, under construction. My main research question at the time when I started it is something that Arnaud Danjean, which is a MEP, a member of the European Parliament, has expressed in Geneva just a few weeks ago. And I just read from the PowerPoint: diplomacy was usually an area of expertise with common rules and a time frame. Nowadays, through media and social networks, everything is dealt with instantly, publicly, and with no restraint whatsoever. And the second sense that I have picked up for reflection for this paper: this is not the best way to handle complex international issues that require time, skills, and moderation. And the last, let's say, cherry-picky sentences that I remember from Kofi Annan during his last anniversary, I mean, his last birthday that he celebrated in Geneva, and I had the chance to be there in the room, was: we need cool minds and sober judgments. So on the basis of these three reflections, I tried to develop this paper analyzing in which sense the speed process, like Hanimaki is a professor at Geneva Graduate Institute, an historian, and is actually a Finnish expert. In a recent article on the Globe, he has said that this process, Finland application, sailed in a record time. So then I try to combine these two statements, or four statements altogether, to understand if there is a link that links hand by hand the Finnish referendum on NATO accession and securitization theory. As you know better than me, as you are expert in this area, the securitization theory explains how, this is from the 90s, from the Copenhagen School, how a process of security is developed as a political issue, as a constructivist approach. So reading, for example, from Arcudi, 2006, in International Review of International Affairs, he said that issues that become securitized do not necessarily represent issues that are essentially to the objective survival of a state, in this case, Finland, but rather represent issues where someone was successful in constructing an issue into an existential problem. So is rather than a security threat, is a construction of a security threat. And my objective of finding this trajectory from a long-standing tradition of Finnish neutrality, as you know, the Winter War, the Continuation War, the Kekkonen Line, so the approach to be neutral in order to appease the Soviet Union, which was necessarily, of course, a difficult partner to handle, going back to 1807 and the Treaty of Tilsit with Napoleon and Alexander I. So basically, I'm looking where we ended up at the moment, which is not ended anyway, because the title of my presentation is what we can learn from the Finnish example. Actually, so far, I still have to learn myself what is the outcome of all this, because the process, I mean, now Finland is part of NATO, fine, but one of the main issues, as Annemaki said, is clearly that this accession of Finland and Sweden, which was anyway on the table from already when they joined the European Union in the 90s, both countries. But the matter is the war in Ukraine is not yet done, so it's not finished yet. So this speedy accession to NATO has been that driven by emotional issues. There are many scholars in Europe now that are evaluating the policies of the EU and the feminist component or emotional component. Just a few months ago, I was in Canada for a meeting with the Canada Association of European Studies, and one of the scholars presented the case of Baroness Ashton when she was dealing with al-Sisi in Egypt, and how these two different minds had a complete different vision of the world. So this emotional Europe, this emotional foreign policy, the question is here in this paper, has been this involved in the process of Finnish accession, in particular during the Sanna Marin government? So that are most of my question to you as well are how do you see this in your own opinion? Now NATO from 1949 to 2004 is 32 member states. Many have celebrated this as an auto celebration that was fantastic and so, but this brings a lot of heterogeneity. Is that good or not? The Baltic Sea now is a NATO lake. Is that a good thing, or is that really a, let's say, a pinch in Russian interest? Now NATO border with Russia has doubled. Can we protect it? Is that a positive thing that we have now a NATO border in Finland? Or is that a negative problem? Or is gonna be this a problem, right? So these are still my pending issues also connected to this paper. And last but not least, I would like to say something as an historian. I'm a bit critical, of course, of NATO itself. As a military officer myself, of the reserve, of course, not serving at the moment, I've been seeing NATO from inside. And I would like to reenact to everybody of you what actually Lord Ismay said, the first Secretary General of NATO. This is not secret. This is clearly in the NATO archives. NATO was created to keep the Soviet Union down, the Americans in, and the German down. This was his own sentence. Now, the Soviet Union is replaced basically by Russia. But the rest, the Americans in and the German down, and the German now is intended as the European Union, I think this is still valid. And what happened in the recent years, I'm a bit worried about. So from my side, there's no much auto celebration of this Finnish accession. And Hannemaki says that the Russian invasion was counterproductive. Of course, counterproductive for Russia in that sense. But the matter is that now we have still this war going on, and as we talked about this yesterday, so you remember my bit of criticism yesterday night, the pressure, as Annemaki said, the pressure will grow to make a deal with Ukraine that one way or another will compromise Ukraine's interest and sovereignty. So basically, accessing NATO under pressure and under emotion, perhaps, developing a securitization theory and means to achieve that a referendum is and was positive to access this alliance, while at the same time we have a war going on for which we don't know the outcome yet, it might be a risky process. And perhaps was better to wait until the dust is settled to, find a European framework of security according to the NATO Charter, of good neighborhood and good relationship with your a bit crazy neighbor. And that is still my question for now. I think I should finish here because also the time is over. So sorry for not bringing much answer, but more questions to this debate and to this panel. Another last question, if I may. If you look at the map of the Cold War times, there is a buffer zone which was represented, in fact, by Sweden and Finland. And the buffer zone goes down to Austria, Yugoslavia, and then to the Black Sea. So my big question at the moment is why we are responding to a new Cold War or to a new Iron Curtain with 180 degrees opposite solution, when actually the Cold War was able also for Finland for the economic growth of Finland, for the security interest of Finland, was actually a positive time which lasted about 60 years. So that is my last question to the panel. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Achim, and we will make a last attempt at hearing GP's presentation. So GP, can you hear us?
So, Professor Leonard, can you hear me?
We can hear you, so please.
Okay, fine, that's fine, all right.
Okay, so do not share your slides, just go ahead. Thank you.
So slide could not be shared, so I will start my presentation without any further ado. So thanks for having me. Great pleasure. My presentation is on shifting technopolar order, prospects and challenges for international security. Basically, I'll be talking about background of political polarity to technopolarity, how the Soviet US political polarization shift to China-US technopolarity, I better say. And I would talk about the next US-China technopower crowns. That is the techno competition between the two superpowers. The
GB, we have lost you there, unfortunately. JP, can you hear us? No, unfortunately, well, it looks as if today is not the day, and that's really unfortunate for you, GP, as you had prepared your presentation, but it seems there are too many problems with the internet connection in your region today, so that's really unfortunate. So we still have 3 minutes until the end of this panel. So are there any other questions, especially perhaps for Michael or for Ikram or for Achim's presentation that we have just heard? Any comments or questions? Yeah, GP. Hi. Veli, yeah, you had a question. Please go ahead.
Yes, my question.
Leonard, is still audible?
GP,
Shall I go ahead and presentation?
Yeah, we
Sorry?
really struggle with understanding what you are saying, unfortunately.
Can you hear me? Hello?
Yes, we can hear you, but your presentation keeps being interrupted, so it's really difficult to hear it.
So my apologies for the unstable internet here.
Yeah. Okay.
If you still hear me, I can continue.
Yes, please continue.
Okay. So talking about the international order, if you take a look back to the various juncture of old history, basically every international order was based on energy resources, whether you talk of oil, gas, water, mineral, nuclear energy, air, nanotechnology. So when the British were resourceful in STEM technology, the world witnessed the British Old Order. And when the British were less rich enough in STEM technology, the US led Old Order was started. And that is basically based on oil and nuclear energy, which US was resourceful. And if we talk about present day world order, data, AI technology, chips are the main source of economy and security. So compare the political developments and various technological or industrial revolution, there is a synchronization as well as simultaneous development between political order and technological advancement. If we talk of first industrial revolution, European order was prevalent. If you talk of second industrial revolution, old order, that is old order between political order between World War First and World War Second existed. And coming back to coming next to third IR, where electronics, telecommunications, and computers, nuclear energy, space expeditions, and biotechnology were prevalent, and the world witnessed the new world order, that is we called post-Cold War order. So basically, if we talk about present-day world order, coming ahead from fourth industrial revolution to present-day industrial revolution, nanotechnology, artificial intelligence, quantum technology, and biotech, where the linking of physical, digital, and biological spheres are prevalent. So if we talk about post-90s technology and foreign policy, they are intertwined. That is, technology largely influencing foreign policy, as well as foreign policy is influencing technological development and deployment. So if you talk of post-Cold War order, unipolar order, that is, after the collapse of Soviet bloc, the US emerged as a sole superpower. Due to economic and technological developments, the US became the only superpower by embracing technology, soft power, globalization, and open world economy as its main economic drivers. And China is exactly following the same driving forces and challenging US-led order now. So, currently, the world is witnessing techno-geopolitical competition between the US-China following the China's technological rise. And a great game between these two tech superpowers is going on. That is also navigating the AI world order. That is the great game. That is the competition between AI technology, weaponization of technology, and controlling digital technology by these two superpowers. And further, the world witnessed the tech bipolarity between the US and China, like in the Soviet era, or between bipolarity between Soviet Union and the United States. There was still tech bipolarity, but no literature has mentioned about tech bipolarity during that era, because NATO and Warsaw Pact were two blocks that were backed by United States and Soviet Union, and they were prevalent in nuclear power and other technologies. Currently, the major competition between the two tech power is happening in digital and cyberspace production, that is production of semiconductor and chips, export and trade sanctions, 5G technology, cloud and firewall. Basically, these two powers. If you take US-China techno-power crunch, politically, China, a Marxist country, economically a liberal, and that believes in socialism, has been a great power for 60 years, and in the process of becoming a superpower. While the US, a politically realist country that believes in democratic capitalism, has been a great power for 100 years and superpower for 75 years. Even larger than the third, fourth, fifth, and sixth largest economy combined together. And if we take a look to GDP of the United States, its GDP is nearly 29 trillion. That is larger than the GDP of a second, third, fourth, fifth, and sixth and seventh largest economy combined. Militarily, if you compare military budget, it's 230 billion per year. of China, whereas the US military budget is 850 billion. That is 4 times higher than that of China. And nearly 250 million soldiers are there in China, whereas the US has 2 million military. Now, the important thing is tech sector contribution in GDP and economic growth. China's tech sector is contributing in nearly 39% of its GDP. Take a look, 39%, whereas US tech sector is contributing to only 12% of GDP. That's drive the techno polar order. That is, China is in the global stage because its technological advancement and its contribution to economy. Due to it, Chinese economy is quite stable, and China has aimed to be a tech superpower by 25 and 2030 AI supremacy. China is 4 times higher than the 4 times higher AI experts than the United States. China produces nearly 600,000 engineers per year. That is 70% higher than India. Whereas US has already a dominant power in politics, diplomacy, and economy, and is extent tech superpower as well as the AI leader. Now, US satellite technology is highly advanced, and its communication mapping and surveillance technology is so advanced that it can detect even a tiny object on the road, sea, and space. So China's capability is stronger. If you talk about cyber capability, Chinese cyber capability is stronger than that of the United States and EU, whereas the US cyber capability is weaker than China, Russia, Iran, and North Korea again. China and Iran have direct control over access points and are capable enough of cutting off access to all international portals. That's why the cyber capability of Russia, China, Iran, and North Korea are strong than EU and United States. China consumes nearly 40% of the total chips produced globally. Another important thing that the world has to worry is China has initiated a concept of sovereign internet that could control key technology supporting critical infrastructure in countries around the world. China consumes 40% of the total chips produced globally. It controls more than 50% of global lithium ion production, 94% of gallium production, 83% of germanium production, and it dominates nearly 93% of EU's magnesium consumption. It controls more than 55% of global rare earth mining, and China has nearly 15,000 manufacturing companies, that is chips manufacturing companies, small or large, while the US has few big chips and manufacturing companies. China has massively invested in technology, artificial intelligence and technology, and it's aiming for algorithmic governance, AI leader. The essential component of national security of China is information and data security. China has massively invested in AI research and innovation by the collaboration between military civil fusion as well as academic and commercial organizations. So talking about economy, China has innovative economy, high saving rate, low cost producer of high quality advanced technology. While the US has an unstable economy, its saving rate is very low, budget deficit is very high. In this current fiscal year, China has a foreign reserve nearly 3.26 trillion. That is nearly equal to the GDP of India, which is exactly helping for the economic stability of China. And China is about to control global telecom network as well. So it has introduced 5.5G, that is the advanced form of 5G technology, which is 10 times faster than the 5G technology, current 5G technology. China is already a global leader in semiconductor and EVs, and recently by the recent plenum of the CPC has proposed high-level development. While the most of the developing countries or developed world are talking about the development, China has planned for high-level development and high-quality products. All this shows that China has been marching very smoothly, elegantly, and by adopting psychological diplomacy. While Dr. Ikrob already talked about information and psychological warfare, I'm going to talk about psychological diplomacy here. So China has major trading partners, more than 120 countries, while the US is offering sanctions against sanctions. And President-elect Donald Trump has already announced to impose hefty tariffs even with his key trading partners, allies, and neighbors, while in the meantime, China has initiated zero tariff mechanism to small states, particularly LDCs. So China has been the manufacturing 35% of global manufacturing products are controlled by, products are from China. So China is globally investing in infrastructure that is via.
Sorry, GP, it seems that we have lost you again, unfortunately. But we need to bring this panel to a close in any case. I just wanted to go back very quickly to Veli because he's been trying to ask a question a couple of times. So I just wanted to give you the opportunity to ask the question, Veli, but very quickly, if you could just ask your question and tell us for whom the question is. It seems we have lost Veli as well in the meantime. All right, so apologies everyone, it's been a challenging panel. No, you're back, Veli, so very quickly, please, Veli.
Yes, my question was going to Michael in terms of when he was talking about the challenges or some of the security or risk mitigating factors or some of the challenges that they go through. I just wanted to ask him what, in cases where, like, is there at large in terms of from a security perspective and political challenges or political at larges when it comes to facilitating diplomacy or safer routes or for diplomats and things like that. So does he experience those challenges between political issues arising from political decisions and then having to deal with then security as well for diplomats, especially in cases where sometimes diplomats can be recalled or called out under emergency situation because of changes in political decisions. And so I'll just try to get to seek clarity around that area of how to strike a balance and how do they mitigate that, especially when it comes as a surprise or it's something that was not planned for, and then immediately then they have to, bring back the diplomatic staff and things like that.
Thank you, Veli. Sorry,
yes,
but we're really
Yeah,
short of time.
yeah.
Thanks. So Michael, please.
No, great question, Billy. Thanks for that. And look, you mentioned there the contingency planning, and look, I suppose most, and certainly the Irish Department of Foreign Affairs, they contingency plan quite a lot of eventualities, and one of them is obviously that we'd say in relation to maybe the host state, maybe send him home, or even maybe some other crisis. So I think a lot of the planning that goes into the assignment of diplomats abroad is the contingency, the what ifs. So, most of them would be covered on that. And look, also, and I'll finish up briefly, is, a lot of the security aspects for diplomats is, obviously maybe potential eavesdropping by the host state or some other activity against the diplomacy. So that certainly will be an area that we will look at, Veli, as well. So the planning aspect of it, and obviously the host state activities in the area of the serving diplomats. So I'll be brief there, Sarah, if that's okay.
Yes, thank you so much, Michael.
Thanks, Veli.
So thank you very much, everyone. Thank you to our speakers for very interesting presentations in somewhat challenging circumstances. It seems it's not a very good day today, probably the bad weather in a few of the places we are joining the conference from. But still, it hasn't prevented us from hearing some very interesting insights and having a very good exchange of ideas. So thank you so much to all the presenters and also to all those who attended the panel. Thank you very much for your feedback and questions. And we will now have a short break, which will be very short, because we have exactly 2 minutes until the next panel starts. And the panel will be chaired by my colleague here at DCU, Dr. Ken McDonough, who's already there. And I look forward to handing over to him, but you now have 2 minutes to grab a quick coffee or a glass of water until we restart. Thank you very much, everyone.
Thanks, Sarah.
Thank
very
you.
much. Thank you,
Thank you very
everyone.
much. Yeah.
See ya. Chat to you soon, Michael.
I can.
Hey, Sarah, thanks. I think we're still waiting for one of the presenters, are we? Adina?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Yeah.
So Alex is there.
Yeah, I think everyone else is here. Alex, Ricardo, Mohammed, and yeah.
Yeah, then maybe, I mean, she's also the last one on the program. So, I mean, I
Yeah.
was in touch with her, so she should arrive, but maybe she'll just be a bit late. So I would suggest you start and then
She might be on yesterday's Zoom link.
maybe I'll get in touch with her in the meantime, but I guess you can get started. Yeah.
Okay, sure. So, welcome everyone to the second panel this morning in the conference on the European Union and multifaceted security threats, crime and organized crime, pandemics and disinformation. So, quite a lot to get through over what looked like four very interesting papers. So, what I'm going to suggest is we'll run through in the order they appear in the program. Try and keep the presentations between 12 and 15 minutes, and that should give us about 25, 30 minutes at the end for discussion. So we're going to start with Dr. Mohammed Aslam. Mohammed received his PhD from Kingston University in London. He's currently a visiting researcher here at DCU, and his presentation is titled "What Works for Cold Case Homicide Investigation: A European Perspective on Policing Policies, Procedures, and Practices." So, Mohammed, if you want to take it away when you're ready.
Hello, sir. Do you hear me?
Yes, yeah, loud and clear.
Yeah, thank you so much. Thank you for inviting me for this presentation. Yeah, my name is Dr. Muhammad Aslam, and my expertise are in a cold case homicide investigation. So I did a global perspective on cold case homicides, in which now I will present my paper on the European perspective on cold case homicide. So I will upload my presentation. Yeah, share. Try to share.
So, at the moment, we can see your email.
Yeah, I will open. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, that's it. That's perfect.
Okay, thank you so much. So my topic is what works for cold case homicide investigation. A European perspective on policing, policies, procedure, and practices. My slide is, first of all, I will define what the cold case is. So the term cold case is complex and definition of cold case. However, it is generally that cold case homicides are those cases in which there is no need to progress the case for prosecution or justice has not been served yet. So many scholars have a definition of so many different ideas of cold case. But in general, where the justice has not been served, these cases are called cold case homicides. So, but if we can say whether this definition fulfill the global recognition, no, because sometimes the leads are there and clear, but due to the political interference or corruption in the police or somewhere, so the case is unsolved. So this is not the global recognized definition, but most law enforcement agencies define this term like this, that if the case has not been solved yet, so or the justice has not been solved yet. So the next question is why cold case homicide matter for us? So there is so many, for example, they are serious because homicide is very serious crime. So this could be solved. So this is the responsibility of a state and the law enforcement agencies to solve it. So the second major reason justice for the victims and their families. They are because the families are waiting for justice for so many years, maybe 1 year, 2 years, or 10 years, and they are tired and they may, the police and the criminal justice system has lost trust of community because they can't see to their trust in the eyes of community, and so that they can solve these cases. And another reason why the cold case homicides matter for us is the fear of recidivism. Because if the offender has not been arrested, the offender is still inside the community and he commit another crime, or the society is still feeling comfortable that the offender is still there, so maybe he is committing another crime. So it's important that the cold case must be solved. So offender deserve punishment because if this is more horrific crime, so if the offender has not been arrested, so he must be punished, and this is the responsibility of law enforcement agencies to arrest them and prosecute them. So the rates of undetected homicides in Europe, because I cannot see any global centralized system where we can in particular jurisdiction. For example, there is just a rough idea that in USA, for example, there is more than 300,000 cold case homicides. Similar in Canada as well, and nearly 50% murder cases are unsolved over there. If we are talking about in Europe, or for example in UK, 10% homicides are unsolved in the United Kingdom as well. And Finland is the highest detection rate, which is only 2% homicides go cold. And over 1,000 cold case homicide in Poland, which are still looking for the detective skills to come forward and these. Germany has 6 to 12% cold case homicide. Switzerland has 13%. Sweden, Netherlands, Ireland has a 20% cold. So we actually don't have a whole data that where we can, for example, say how much cold case homicides are there in the files of different jurisdiction in European countries. So still I am interviewing and developing these things that we have some certain centralized system. So the main purpose of this presentation is to introduce the problem of cold case and take the attention of academics who are working in different, for example, universities and countries, that the cold case, especially the homicide, is a serious crime, and must be policy in practice. There should be limitations, statutes of limitations for this particular horrific crime. And there should be a databases where we academic can overview that how much cases have been solved every year. So the next European policing framework, the European Europol, Interpol, and national police forces are individually working on these cases. For example, the Europol, they advertise different appeals and are requesting the public to come forward if they have some information. Similarly, Interpol and international coordination between different law enforcement agencies in case if the offender is fled away to in other countries. So this is the platform. So the individual police forces are working. Some police forces, for example, has developed cold case units, specialized case unit in various countries such as France established its first cold case units in 2020. Ireland established serious crime review team in 1997. So the Amber Alert Europe International Cold Case project was launched in 2020 to global cooperation and cold cases between law enforcement agencies and academic communities across Europe and beyond. So the main problem is I can see that now, for example, the Amber Alert Europe and also the Locate International, and also there is some program at University of South Wales where the academics and the law enforcement agencies are working collectively to solve. They invite PhD students or master's or students to review these cold cases, and they can give some, for example, they can give some their own insights and observations, and due to some cases has been solved. So I believe that there should be international cooperation between academics and the law enforcement agencies. The major problem which I, for example, face during this projects is most law enforcement agencies are reluctant not to share information with the academic communities. So if we don't know how many, for example, cold cases are there and how the police is going on these cases, how they prioritize cases in terms of investigation, and how the families are addressed who have suffered wide range of psychological disorder, how they are cooperating, whether there is any, for example, money available for them to support the bereaved family who are affected by the homicides. So this platform is most important to address the cold case problem. So the next is challenges and issues, the limited resources and funding. Most law enforcement agencies receive funding annually, but there is, I didn't see any example where the separate funding were allocated to cold case units, for example. In the United Kingdom, for example, the Home Office allocate funding on periodic views, maybe in a 5 year or 3 years, 4 years. But still, we don't know how many cold cases are still waiting for justice in one particular law enforcement agencies. When I send a freedom of information request, for example, how many cold cases are there? So most law enforcement agencies, we are managing our data, so we still don't know how many cold cases are there. So this is the main excuse the law enforcement agencies. However, the University of South Wales has started coordination with the South Wales Police and other. Now it is emerging to the law enforcement agencies and the universities are now coming together. But the problem is still there. We don't know any centralized system anywhere in the world. There is no any single jurisdiction, but most countries have 20%, 30%, 40% undetected homicide. So this is a serious crime, serious problem, which need to be addressed. So resources should be allocated separately, apart from, for example, the other policing funding. So legal and procedural limitations as well. The legal, for example, main context is there is no statutes of limitations in any jurisdictions. So if we would introduce new laws, we can, for example, recommend some policies that could be forwarded to the different parliaments, and this could be discussed that this is a major problem. And for example, if the case is no, for example, in some law enforcement agencies, they declare cold case in 28 days times, other 1 month, another 6 months, and sometimes it takes years. For example, when I contacted the police Scotland, the police Scotland said, we never we can't recognize the cold case from, and our cases are always solved, no matter how long time has been passed. So the cases are always open until they are solved. But this is depend upon agency's own rules and regulations when they declare that the case should be closed or when it could be declared as. If we have a particular policy, then this problem could be addressed, that we know after how long the case will be labeled as cold. So this is the major challenge which I send. And the procedure, nobody knows when it will be reopened. This is again on depends upon the agency's own policies and procedure when they can reopen the case. So the next is recommendations. So the recommendation is establishment of cold case units, because one case has nearly 10,000 pages. For example, this is a big case file. So big case file review need a lot of time and resources for the detective to review in the United Kingdom. So if we have a dedicated team of detectives who are all the time working on these things, it will help. So the cold case, the homicide detection rate could be separate from the cold case homicide detection rate, because there is no any jurisdiction who tell who write or publish any report on annual basis that what is the cold case homicide detection rate, how many cases has been solved annually, but they mix up with the detection rate of homicide detection rate, and we don't know how many previous cases were solved. So there is no any agency. So I believe there should be a separate cold case units that can publish their reports on an annual basis, so the public and the academic community know how many cases has been solved and how many cases are still there. So the second thing is allocation of funding for the cold case units. This could be separate from a mainstream policing. So they are full-time working. They don't have any other, for example, policing responsibilities they can fulfill. Only they will be working on court cases all the time. So the establishment of standardized data sharing protocols. Most law enforcement agencies, there should be coordination nationwide and at an international level, where the law enforcement agencies can upload their cases, and the academics and the retired police officer and the serving police officer come together, and they can look and give their own fresh insights, so that the cases, for example, should be solved. And this should be an international collaboration, apart from Europe, or I'm talking about globally, in USA, Canada, Asian, and other countries who are willing to be. So this could help to solve cases as well. So that was my short presentation, and thank you so much for your attention. And if you have any question, please ask.
Thanks very much, Mohammed, and impeccable timing through the presentation as well. So it was a very interesting one. I'll just ask people if we can hold the questions until the end, and we'll take them collectively if we can. So next up we have Alexander Price, Alex is a PhD candidate here in the School of Law and Government at TCU, and he's part of the EU Glockter Doctoral Network. His presentation is on the Kremlin and organised crime in Europe, a case study of mercenary recruitment networks in Italy. So, Alex, if you want to take it away, if you have a PowerPoint to share, you should be able to do so.
Thank you. Yes. Let me share some slides, see if we can get it on the first try. Okay. Wants me to change my system settings. So let's see, this should be quick. Okay, I'll be back in one.
We need some interval music for this such a situation.
Well, we would have listened to entire albums over the last 2 days. Unfortunately, we've had a few technological challenges. Or any good singer amongst our participants? I think Alex is back.
All right, let's see if it'll let me share it now that we've updated. There we go. Okay.
So whenever you're ready, Alex, you want to take it away?
Sure. Okay, let's see if I can get this to go full screen real quick. Okay. View. Okay. I'll just jump in. So thank you so much for the invitation, and thank you everybody for sharing your time with me today. As you mentioned, I'm Alexander Price. I'm a doctoral candidate in the Department of Law and Government at DCU. My research here is part of the EU Glockter Doctoral Network funded by the European Union and UK Research and Innovation. And my project is titled EU Counterterrorism, Hybrid Warfare and Radicalization. So today I'm presenting on a work in progress. It's the Kremlin and Organized Crime in Europe, a case study of a mercenary recruitment network in Italy. And this is builds on research that I conducted as a master's student at St. Antony's College at the University of Oxford this year. So let's see. It's I'm still trying to get it full screen. Okay. So the background for the research is that it's widely understood that the Russian state has a special relationship with transnational organized crime. After the fall of the Soviet Union in 1991, criminal networks in Russia were able to gain control of vast amounts of state resources in the privatization process. Simultaneously, Vladimir Putin's placement in the St. Petersburg mayor's office and his rise through the FSB, at the very least, brought him into very close relationship with organized crime. And there are many critics who argue that he was an agent of organized crime in the new Russian government, and that his election to the presidency in 2000 represented the mafia capture of the Russian state. So recently in the 21st century, Russian propagandists such as Alexander Dugin have acted as thought leaders in a growing international illiberal movement that's in opposition to Western liberal institutions such as the European Union,
Sorry, Alex, we've just lost your audio there. If you just want to repeat your point about Dugin and the European Union, that would be great.
And this
Alex, unfortunately, we're not able to hear you. Yeah. Okay. I see what you mean, Sarah, about needing Okay, Alex, we can see you again now.
Okay, I'm sorry. I don't know what happened. Was the connection on my side?
Yeah, we just lost you just as you're making the point about Duggan and being the head of the
Okay.
illiberal movement.
Okay. So let's just go back a little. He's in Russian propagandists like Alexander Dugin have been thought leaders in this growing illiberal movement that's in opposition to Western liberal institutions like the European Union and the cultural values associated with Western liberalism, which they identify as wokeness, LGBTQ rights, and they're also especially focused on immigration policies. Russia's status as a thought leader in this illiberal movement has enabled the Kremlin to connect directly and indirectly with individuals and groups in Europe who share those values. So the case that I'm looking at in this study concerns a far-right neo-fascist, neo-Nazi, pro-Russian mercenary recruitment network, which emerged in Italy in 2014 and sent Italian citizens and residents of Italy to Ukraine to fight on the side of pro-Russian separatists in Donbas. In 2018, arrest warrants were issued for 6 of the members of the network. And in 2019, 3 of them were convicted for participating illegally in a foreign conflict and for recruitment. And they served sentences varying from 1 to 2.5 years, while 3 additional individuals were convicted in absentia and remain at large in occupied Ukraine. The reason the case is significant is partly because it offers a recent example of European citizens who were recruited to engage in significant violence on behalf of the Kremlin. And it also raises theoretical questions about the relationship between the state, foreign intelligence operations, and organized crime. The judge in this case agreed with the prosecutors that the pro-Russian mercenary recruitment network in Italy was an organized crime group. So I'm approaching the analysis of the case from a sort of critical studies perspective, drawing on critical legal studies and critical security studies. The question I was asking is, are states' foreign intelligence operations organized crime? Another way of saying it could be, is transnational organized crime just the name that security services give to the foreign intelligence operations of adversary states? Primary sources for the study included court documents, such as judgments, and especially this investigative report, which was submitted by prosecutors to the District Court of Geneva in Italy. So from the theoretical perspective, researchers who've offered a critical studies perspective, such as Hobbs and Antonopoulos, who were writing largely during the U.S. War on Terror in the early 2000s, argued that U.S. security services such as the CIA mobilized the concept of transnational organized crime at the end of the Cold War as a way to continue the conflict with the KGB under a new name. Hobbs and Antonopoulos argued that the specter of organized crime and the subsequent war on terror gave the hawks in the U.S. security establishment the reasons they needed to continue to exist after the Cold War ended and there was the apparent defeat of their main adversary and their whole reason of existing. The counter argument that which I might offer is that it could simply be the case that the KGB actually survived the collapse of the Soviet Union as an organized crime group. So these are 2 sort of competing perspectives that are under consideration. In generally, skeptical approaches to legal realism often trace their philosophical origins to an argument from Plato's Republic, an argument which is attributed to the ancient Greek sophist philosopher Thrasymachus. His argument in the Republic appears in the context of a debate about the definition of what is justice. The philosophers are arguing whether it's just to harm bad people and unjust to harm good people. And Thrasymachus argues that individuals in power make the laws according to whatever is advantageous to their own interests. And so I have this quote here. He says, and they declare what they have made, what is to their own advantage, to be just for their subjects. And they punish anyone who goes against this as lawless and unjust. This then is what I say justice is, the same in all cities, the advantage of the established rule. Anyone who reasons correctly will conclude that justice is the same everywhere, namely the advantage of the stronger. So this is sort of the philosophical origin of critical studies, and you know, the relationship between the law and the status quo. And in the present context, I argue that it applies to criticism of American foreign policy in the early 2000s, but also the logic that's deployed by Russia now and other proponents of illiberalism to criticize the EU and the liberal world order. So in a sense, it's a knife that cuts both ways. It's valuable both for critics of the status quo who want to make social or legal or political systems better, but also for enemies who would like to see the order replaced with something other than liberalism. So in a widely influential essay in 1985, Charles Tilly, the political scientist Charles Tilly, published an article titled "War Making and State Making as Organized Crime," where he argued that all modern states are effectively organized crime groups which enjoy the advantage of legitimacy. The logic for his claim was that states are made through warfare. War establishes state borders, and citizens within the territory of a state are compelled to pay taxes that not only support the state's ongoing war making, but also ostensibly provide citizens protection from the dangers caused by the wars that the states themselves are making. So he argued that this represents the largest and most successful protection racket in operation, which also enjoys the advantage of legitimacy, portraying itself as a legitimate system of governance. He goes on to provide an analysis of the doctrine of the state's monopoly on the means of violence, which seems to me to bear direct relevance to coups, insurgencies, or in the present case, the mercenary recruitment network, which all of which for various reasons wish to change the status quo. Based on the logic of illiberalism articulated by far-right political leaders in Russia, in Italy, and also throughout the EU, members of this mercenary recruitment network arguably didn't perceive themselves as organized criminals, but as a sort of heroic vanguard of the resistance movement, offering protection to their own communities based on notions of ethnic and national identity, which they perceived as oppressed and victimized by liberalism and its governing institutions. So, you know, my takeaway from this is that it really underscores the need to articulate how liberal theory and critical studies are not the same as relativism. So this is, as I said, a work in progress, and I'm still especially thinking about the theoretical implications, and I'm grateful to receive any suggestions and feedback. But provisionally, my provisional conclusions are that illiberal narratives seem to rely on a misreading of liberal theory as a form of relativism, and that this is a widespread error. The misreading suggests that all perspectives are equally valid, but also paradoxically identifies the proponents of liberalism as intolerant parties who are in conflict with, the far right, the neo-fascists, and their other, aligned political allies who portray themselves as the victims of the liberal order. And so in extreme cases such as this, it can lead to acts of violence, including, in this case, fighting in war against a European state. So thank you again for having me, and I look forward to hearing any suggestions you may have.
Thanks very much, Alexander. It's always great to hear Thrasymachus being brought out this early on a Friday morning.
Wonderful.
It's going to be some really some interesting conversations to be had later. Okay, our next presenter then, if we move along, we'll keep those questions towards the end, is Ricardo Pereira. Ricardo is also a doctoral candidate here in the School of Law and Government at Dublin City University, and his paper is titled "The Pharmacy of the World: Analyzing the European Union's Response to COVID-19 as a Multidimensional Threat." So, Alex, if you could stop sharing your screen there, that would be great.
Meanwhile, Kenneth, sorry, but because I can't share my screen because I'm in my browser, so I sent my presentation to your email. If you can share my presentation.
Okay, sure. I'll see if I
If you
can
don't
do
mind.
it.
Thank you.
Okay, 2 months.
Just to be part of this technical issues wave.
I have it now, just downloading it. Okay, I think we can see it there, can we?
Yeah, perfect.
Okay.
Thank you.
You just give me the nod when you want me to change something.
For sure, thank you. Good morning, everyone. The research that I will bring today is part of my ongoing research for my PhD as part of the study, the collective securitization of COVID-19 in the cyber and health domain. Here, I will just focus on the health domain that actually was part of my master dissertation. Kenneth, if you could move to the next slide. So, as everyone remembers, COVID-19 from 2020 is already, I would say, a old issue for most of us. But the question why is relevant to study COVID-19 nowadays still is important to be done. I would like to highlight first exceptionality of COVID-19, not just to be part of a brutal threat, as Balzac would argue in its concept from 2011, but actually it's existential threat. I just put here some numbers to compare with past pandemics, for example, the SARS one in 2002 or the H1N1 in 2009, and we can see that actually the numbers are completely different if we compare it with the last pandemics. At the same time, the interesting point of studying COVID nowadays is the lake or the gap in the literature regarding this trinity or intersection between European studies, security, and health politics. Usually, we have this approach more to integration theories or institutionalization. The literature kind of forgets to look to the security field of the issue, and moreover, another empirical point is to understand this lack of cooperation and coordination at the EU level in the beginning of the pandemic. For instance, if you remember that we had countries such as Russia, Cuba, and China that helped first Italy instead of European countries. For instance, we had Germany that kind of stopped the delivery of medical supplies to Italy. And then we had Ursula von der Leyen in March 2020 saying, of course, this was not the correct sentence, but in an informal way, what Ursula said was more or less like, guys, we need to wake up. We need to actually support each other. We are a union. This actually was a sentence she used. We are a union, and we need to work together. So, Kenneth, can you move to the next slide? Thank you. So, in this regard, the research question that is guiding my research. This is a very broader question. I know that I need to kind of narrow it, but how the EU discourse, but particularly the Commission, did reflect the collective securitization of COVID-19 between 2020 and September 2021. I will not dive so much in my theoretical framework. I'm just saying that I will use collective securitization. That is a recent, not so recent approach. to securitization, although it was mentioned already in the beginning of the century, but it was recently developed in 2019 by Sperling and Wever, and then a special issue regarding the European Union. And my main method here is discourse analysis. I already analyzed 52 speeches from the European Commission, and my time framework is from February 2020, because it was indeed when the EU faced the COVID in a more aggressive way, to September 2021, sorry, because it was the second State of the Union. So it makes sense to compare between the first and the second State of the Union to see differences. And can you move to the next slide, please, Kenneth? Thank you. So, and indeed, to continue this thought, this will not be my final time framework. Actually, it should go until 2026, when the new EU Health program will emerge again after this EU for Health program. But from this research, I highlight already 4 phases of the EU response to the COVID-19. The first comprehends between February 2020 to March 2020, and indeed this was the bigger approach of EU to COVID as a brutal threat, following this idea of Balzac, talking about the test to EU cooperation and solidarity. Actually, this was an expression of Ursula von der Leyen. So the testing the values, the European values during this time. Indeed, this construction of threat as a global health crisis, not just in the international domain, but in the European domain, it was interesting to see. But more than that, it's also interesting to understand in the securitizing process how the security actor constructs itself as a security actor. You know, because when we talk about the European Union that doesn't have the full competence of health, it's interesting how the EU kind of dressed itself as an actor to respond to the COVID in a collective approach. And indeed, the Commission in this point had an interesting role, calling for cooperation and coordination, and actually to bring new practices to the table. I will not say that they were big, you know, because they didn't have and even nowadays they don't have the competence to address pandemics like states have. But indeed, to create committees, special groups, and actually to influence states to take action. It was a symbolical power that the Commission had during this time. The second phase is the Marshall Plan for the post-COVID-19. Actually, that is importance of this metaphor of Marshall Plan during this phase, because we had a relaxation of quarantine measures, and as Sarah and Christian argued some years ago, that is a securitization by association with other domains, such as the economic domain and the cyber domain, that actually some colleagues will talk later about this, I think in the next panel, actually, with the fake news. For instance, when we refer Joseph Borrell, that kind of was absent from the COVID-19 management. Joseph Borrell had this interesting expression of infodemic, how fake news become the new pandemic of the 21st century. And I will use this expression of Ursula von der Leyen that referred the economic recession as the worst in the last 100 years, just to refer again this securitization by association to the economic domain. Here, it's important to actually refer how they use constructed security. If we talk about, for example, the debate about EU health competence during this time. So when we arrived to the summer of 2020, this was debated. When I say debated, it's not the same as confirmed as a new competence to the EU, but indeed member states agree that the EU needs more power, symbolical power, I would say, to manage health threats. A third phase comprehends between October to December 2020. Here we had again the increase of infections during the winter, so we're back to this notion of brutal threat, of an health threat, but we had a shift in the security speech, because here we have already a strong collective approach to the pandemic. We have this development of vaccine strategy, the idea of Team Europe in the international level that we can discuss later, this notion of what is a Team Europe, that it's completely different from the response to the H1N1, and the strengthening of EU agencies like ECDC and EMA. The last phase is almost the entire 2021 year, where we face the COVID variants, and actually these variants are associated to zoonotic diseases and for consequence to environmental change. And it's interesting how the Union, and in this role the Commission, used the COVID to approach a diverse range of topics, to actually touch them as an important issue to the Union during this time. And just to mention some security developments, we had the digital certificate, the launching of ERA, that is the European BARDA. So we kind of copied the states with this new structure. And the One Health goal, that is not a new goal in terms of health security. We had this goal in the last century, but in these terms, we are not so utopic, because we know that we cannot achieve this goal, but we need to work to actually to improve health in the international scenario, and more than that, to understand that, for example, until what point health can be understood as a global common good. Indeed, the question of vaccination and the expression of Ursula von der Leyen comparing vaccination as a human right kind of confirms this argument. And the speeches, I will just highlight briefly the metaphors, the game number, and the repetition of some expressions. For example, invisible enemy, or this very interesting sentence of von der Leyen when she said, when Europe really needed to be there for each other, too many initially looked out for themselves. And instead, in regard of how threat construction result, this had an impact in the beginning of the securitization process. So Kenneth, can you move to the next slides? Thank you. So this is just an example of a measure that results from the EU response to COVID. This is a strategic rescue stockpile regarding to medic supplies, and I will call your attention because we had the continuum after the COVID. So we used practices from the COVID-19 to actually address new issues. For instance, the Ukrainian war, you can look to the yellow spaces where actually this stockpile has been applied even with outside of the COVID space. Sorry. So can you move to the next slide? Thank you. So this is a BioNTech biocontainer. So this is the idea of international role of European Union. This was delivered to Rwanda, although we can address some critiques regarding the sharing of know-how, because this know-how is not being shared with a local community or these countries. Actually, this know-how is stuck in the European Union. People from Europe go to these countries and develop these mobile labs. And more than that, we had actually a problem of logistics, because in certain countries, we don't have the resources that are needed to deliver these vaccines to specific communities, to communities that actually need to be supported. And I will just highlight one interesting point, that these containers don't work just for the COVID, but actually for other diseases such as malaria, HIV, and local diseases. Can you move to the next slide, please? So in conclusion, we can point some preliminary findings that indeed the characterization of COVID-19 pandemic is a brutal threat. So a process of securitization allowed to COVID-19 to be classified as a global health crisis. We can actually see an inconstant characterization of the threat, as I have already mentioned before, but we can find a constant construction of security in the EU case, and then we can discuss this point later. At the same time, we can find a window of opportunity regarding the Commission to improve its power regarding addressing health issues. And it's linked to the last point of this recursive interaction between European Parliament and member states, which gave to the Commission a representative authority to address European public health issues. And thank you very much. That's it.
That's fantastic, Ricardo. Thank you very much for a very clear and interesting presentation. We'll move on now to the final presentation, then people can prepare their questions for the discussion afterwards. So our final speaker then is Dr. Edina Lila Mesharos, who is a lecturer in the Faculty of History, International Relations, Political Science and Communication Sciences at the University of Oradea in Romania. So Edina, if you want to share your screen, if you can.
Yes, please. Please tell me if you can see it.
Yeah, we can see it there.
Okay, if I do the slideshow,
Yeah,
I just move the slides. It's okay. So can you? I put the slideshow view. Is it okay? I mean,
okay,
I'm moving my slides.
We're still looking at your outline view.
So I just moved my slides. It's not working. So
No.
perhaps I'm going to get out and we will proceed without slideshow. So dear colleagues, it's a pleasure and an honor for me to be here, and I'm really grateful for the fact that you accepted me as a speaker. As you could see at the title of my presentation, it tackles one of the most current challenges with which the European Union is facing. I mean, the problem of disinformation. In my presentation, I will I will present disinformation as a hybrid warfare instrument and as a hybrid threat. And I want to assess how resilient the European Union and its member states are to disinformation. And I will put a special emphasis on the so-called whole of society approach, especially tackling mainly the societal form of resilience building. I just moved my slides. I hope that it's visible. Just a few introductory remarks. I believe that all of us, we know that states and societies that flourish with the acquisition and use of information. So all of us, we use information as a daily basis. Some of us in the written media, while others in radio and television, or the vast majority perhaps, we use social media platforms. Probably you have seen from what has been happening in the past few years at the level of the European Union, that sadly information can be weaponized. I mean, in my paper, I want to show this information as a weaponized information. And I'm arguing that it's a critical component of both hybrid threats and hybrid warfare, and it's being used by both state and non-state actors in order to achieve various objectives. If we are speaking about, for example, state actors such as Russia, especially from the EU's eastern vicinity, one of the most important aim of Russia, for example, is to foment violence and to destabilize and to polarize society, so destabilize the European Union and to sow fragmentation within the member states. So what is the aim of my study? So besides the conceptualization of the terms disinformation and resilience, so I've defined the terms with which I'm operating. I have split resilience building measures in 5 major categories. I put an emphasis on the political, legal, measures that the European Union has been taking in the past decade, especially since 2014, since the annexation of Crimea by Russia and its intervention in Ukraine and the consolidation of Daesh in 2015 as well. After the political and legal measures, what institutional measures, so what institutions, what agencies created, such as the European Union Hybrid Fusion Cell, probably many of you have heard of it, specifically targeting hybrid threats. What about interinstitutional cooperation measures, regulatory measures, and the societal approach? I mean, the societal resilience building measures. So in my paper, I want to argue that there's a direct link between media literacy, the freedom of press, the level of education in a country, and resilience to disinformation. So my most important hypothesis is that I'm stressing that the higher the level of education, the media literacy, and the freedom of press within a society, the more efficient the resilience building against disinformation. And in order to prove my point of view, I even promoted a comparative analysis after assessing the media literacy index from the past few years. You will see on a list of around 44 states, not just from Europe, but from outside Europe as well, that the highest ranking countries, I mean, countries from Europe and also from the European Union, which have the highest levels of media literacy, such as Finland, Denmark, Norway, Iceland. And while in case of my country, such as Romania or our neighboring country, Bulgaria, we are one of the tail enders. So I know that just by comparing two case studies, it's not enough to generalize, and it's not enough to prove this hypothesis that the higher the level of education. But if you look at the other countries as well, and if we could undertake a comparative analysis between other countries as well, from the front runners to the tail enders, I believe that we could prove this argument. One of the other case studies that in the past few years I've been researching the impact of hybrid threats and the EU's resilience, but especially since I'm a migration and security and border security specialist, I'm tackling a lot of subjects on the deliberate facilitation of irregular immigration. Probably you have seen or you have heard that at the EU's northern and eastern border, Russia and Belarus, they are deliberately weaponizing human beings for political purposes. I mean, besides mingling into elections, besides disinformation, cyber attacks, and other types of disruptive actions, Russia and Belarus, they're also deliberately facilitating irregular immigration in order to destabilize the EU member states from the EU's eastern flank, and as such, the European Union as a whole. For us to make a clear differentiation when we're speaking about conceptualization, I took into account the America's Cyber Defense Agency, the NATO reference curricula, but especially put an emphasis on the European Democracy Action Plan and how and to see how disinformation is being defined at the level of the European Union. As you could see, I put there various concepts. They're not synonyms because they refer to different things. Probably all of you know that the biggest difference between misinformation and disinformation is the intention. While misinformation is false or misleading content, such as disinformation, but in case of misinformation, we cannot speak about a deliberate harmful intent. So people are spreading fake information, but not with the bad intention to disrupt, to destabilize. While in case of disinformation, is deliberately created to mislead, harm, manipulate a person, a social group, or organization, or a country. I know that I do not have time, but I wanted you to see that my paper does not lack a proper literature review. So I made a conceptual delimitation of what hybrid threats means, what hybrid warfare, after it, how are hybrid threats and hybrid warfare defined by the European Union. The definition comes from its framework document elaborated in 2016, and to see what the European Union understands by hybrid threats, a mix of cursive and subversive activity, conventional and unconventional methods that can be deployed in a coordinated way by both states and non-state entities in order to achieve precise targets. As I told you, to destabilize, to sow fragmentation, to polarize societies. Of course, since I'm speaking about resilience to the hybrid threat of disinformation, I made a proper literature review, and I saw how resilience appeared, in what context. It was first coined by a Canadian ecologist, and later on, it was step by step introduced in the field of political science and ER. If you were interested and you were analyzing in the past few decades, they use strategic documents. Let me tell you that both resilience, hybrid threats, and hybrid warfare, they're catchphrases. I mean, they're buzzwords. I made a qualitative assessment. I presented in a chronological order that how is resilience being communicated in EU documents and what does the community mean by it. If there's some among you who does not understand or do not know what the term resilience means, a definition given by the Commission in 2016, the ability of a person, of a household, of a community, a country, a region to withstand, adapt, and recover quickly from stresses and shock. So in my paper, I put this information in a dual nexus. On the one hand, as you could see, it's presented as a hybrid warfare tool used by various state and non-state agents, especially originating from the EU's eastern neighborhood. And if we tackle the problem from the perspective of resilience, I consider this information as a shock, as a stress factor that alters the system and the prevalent status quo. So I told you that I promised this 5-level analysis. I know that I do not have time. So this is like a general way of, this is a part of an ongoing research. So I'm about to publish on this matter. I know that I do not have enough time in order to present. Just you see the EU's response to hybrid threats and resilience building measures. So these measures that the European Union took in the past decade. First, we're speaking about the legal framework, the institutional resilience building, interinstitutional cooperation. At the level of the legal framework, since we're speaking about disinformation, let me tell you that one of the most important is the European Commission Action Plan Against Disinformation. And if we're speaking about the institutional measures that the European Union introduced in the past few years that specifically target disinformation, as I told you that what has happened following the annexation of Crimea is sort of represent a blueprint in the way how the European Union understands and how wants to tackle this phenomenon. So when it comes to the EU tackling disinformation, in 2015, as I told you, as a direct connection to what has happened in Ukraine following 2013 and 2014, under the auspices of the European Union External Action Service, the EU Stratcom Task Force was established. So this task is to debunk, to verify information that is mainly generating from the EU's eastern vicinity. Is like a myth buster. So it aims at tackling disinformation that is coming from this neighborhood. And one of its flagship products, probably you've heard of it, is the EU's Disinformation Review. You can put your email, and on a weekly basis, you receive a newsletter. We also have the EU Disinfo. 2017, another task force, Stratcom Task Force, was established, but for debunking fake news that is coming from the Western Balkans. What about the regulatory measures? I mean, it's really important at the EU's regulatory instruments to scrutinize the algorithms and the content of Meta, Google, and Twitter. And in this regulatory resilience building measures, the European Union came with a code of practice, 2018 and 2022. And in 2019, it introduced a so-called rapid alert system. But since my paper tackles a whole of society approach, and I'm stressing that besides all these measures that we talked, so what the EU, what the member states, what kind of agencies were they creating? Since we're speaking about disinformation, and disinformation directly targets people, citizens like us, I believe that we should come with this whole of society approach and engage the partners from the private sector, academia, and the non-governmental sector. I mean, first of all, citizens must be educated, must be well informed about what is going on. And we should invest in civic awareness through education and by maintaining an independent press. And probably Many of you have heard about investigative journalists and what investigative journalism, that it plays a pivotal role in tackling disinformation. And one of these independent investigative journalist groups is called Bellingcat. It's based in The Hague. And I believe that it perfectly fits the societal measure. Just looking at the media literacy in Europe, one of my main hypotheses, I told you that there's a direct correlation between the level of education, the